morning to the Central Time Zone. Good afternoon to our Eastern Time Zone friends. Boy, when I get a producer in here, I'll have somebody else push that button for me. But until then, which will be never, I'll look forward to pushing that button at 11:30. So far, every weekday. Who knows how long we'll want to keep taking this journey together. I appreciate those of you who touch base with me and those who have reached out. I really appreciate those who have continued to support my work with the marginalized, still feeding some homeless people, still reaching out to some people who really need some help, and who would have not found a safety net had this pandemic not even hit. But with the pandemic, it has exacerbated their situation. Probably can't get into the details, but I just really appreciate, and there's been some very generous gifts, and that has allowed me to be generous with some people who have leaned on me, honestly, for some time. And I always am quick to remind them that the help I give is not just from me, that it's from very generous people, that I'm simply honored to be a conduit on their behalf. So, all right. Well, I want to play catch up for 1 minute. We're not going to put that ketchup on a hot dog because you never put ketchup on a hot dog. But I just wanted to remind us that the mental wellness effects of this pandemic is taking place. It's easy to lose that perspective, I think, because of the craziness coming out of our national leadership. We can become so fixated on that, that as if that's the only thing of importance, and it is vitally important. But we need to remember the devastating physical effects of social isolation on so many people. I shared these statistics a while back, and I want to share them again because they were shocking to me. This comes from, the a study group over in London Hospital, but it's not just a hospital, it's a study-based group there. It says loneliness increases the likelihood of mortality by 26%. In other words, loneliness is going to shorten your life. Loneliness has comparable impact, and this is the part that's just like, just blow me away. Comparable impact of well-known risk factors such as obesity and cigarette smoking. I had to reread that and had to make sure that it was properly footnoted, and is indeed, it's been peer-reviewed. That's a frightening statistic in any time, but now, dear friends, what that says is that you and I are really mandated, or I'm not quite sure what the right word is, but hopefully we are compelled. How about that for words? Good. That we are compelled to pick up the phone and call those people who we think just might be experiencing loneliness. And loneliness can take place when there's more than one person living in the home. And so I would say take the shotgun approach and call a bunch of people, and you won't have to worry about whether or not you've called somebody lonely. But if everybody calls a bunch of people, picks up the phone, reaches out, then we will be in contact with them in a way that's really significant and meaningful. And then the other statistic that was mentioned was the increased risk of developing coronary heart disease and stroke. Blood pressure, increased blood pressure, that I would have perhaps guessed, so to say. And also it increases the likelihood of frailty. And that's interesting from a scientific standpoint for me. In other words, if you fall and you're lonely, higher the probability that you will break something. Okay. Depression, just reading off my sheet here. And of course, suicide grows noticeably as age progresses. So anyway, I just wanted to remind us of that because we cover a lot of things here, and I just want to go back and touch base with some of them. All right. Excuse me. And here I thought I was going to be able to announce today, don't worry about me having a cough today, because I had a good excuse me, a good furball experience earlier today. But again, I appreciate those of you who reach out and say, hey, you okay? Yeah, I am. I just got this lung thing, and it has nothing to do with the little bug that is playing such a horrific part in our culture right now. So, all right, so we continue our journey. I am benefiting from going over and over. One of the aspects of addressing simplicity I want to mention early is that it says to be aware of nature. And I am pleased to let everybody know that the robin that built a nest in our back patio area, they have the little baby chicks have popped out of their eggs, and Mama is furiously going around and feeding them. And I've always taken note of the fact of how good a robin's hearing is, that they can hear a worm. You know, and that to me, that's just like crazy. You know, they'll cock their head, they'll try to figure out exactly where that noise is coming from, and poof, they'll put their head down and grab up a worm. So kudos to their hearing, and we're going to enjoy watching those little baby chicks. I just barely saw one little head come up today. Other than that, we see the mom going down, but the chicks are coming up. Okay, so we continue in our journey looking at simplicity. Simplicity, as we have noted, flies completely, friends, in the face of where our nation has gone. My little rant yesterday, I said, you know, I felt the church has really co-opted that, and that the church has succumbed to that journey out of probably a sense of fear that if the church talked too much about that, those who had the resources might get further offended at the opportunity and the suggestion that they would share what they had, and because the church never really, the one area that the church did talk about money was almost exclusively the budget. And I was hesitating for a second because, well, they did talk about mission, but many times mission was included in the budget of the church. And so, you know, the church has really fixated its talk simply about its own propagation, you know, its own, there's the right word I'm not thinking of, its own livelihood, its own furtherance. It's as long as the church finances were met, then the finance chair would stand up and say with great glee, brothers and sisters, you know, thank you for your faithful giving because the budget has been met. And so that really allowed then, you know, okay, if the church's budget has been met, I can do whatever I want with the rest of what's been given to me. And that is just so far from the biblical understanding. So that ship has really sailed, because the church has really now gotten into a position where it had an opportunity to talk to people in a broader sense about that what is in your purview, to not see it as your own, but to see yourself as a steward. And so stewardship, we love to have finance committees. but over the years, I've been hard pressed to have people who would really try to talk about stewardship. Well, I think I've come to understand that more clearly now. We don't want to talk that much about stewardship because finance is a finite setting. And if I can, if the church can meet its finances, then we'll be happy. But when we go, perhaps, even that's a big enough struggle right now for many churches, and it's going to be an increasing struggle over the years. But we leave preaching, as they say, and go to meddling when we begin to talk about simplicity and that we are stewards of what we have, not owners of what's in our purview. And so that all ties together, I hope, ties together pretty self-explanatorily with simplicity, because when we live a life of simplicity, it's just a different attitude. We're not in that rat race to get more. We're not in the concern about what label of the jacket we're wearing, what kind of car that we're driving. Excuse me. I simply need to do more talking to myself or Betsy before we get started on these things. So that's the relationship between simplicity, between finance, stewardship, and simplicity. Okay, again, just to reiterate this statement from Foster's book, and again, let me say that if you want to grab a hold of this, you can get it for free. I'm not sure, probably something Richard Foster did. He's no longer with us, but in his desire to help everybody live a more spiritually fulfilling life, he has allowed his book to be online for free. So if you just search for Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster, free PDF, I think you'll go right to it. And I know sometimes we're a little afraid of those kind of things. Is there really a free PDF of a book? And I would say yes, this is online for free. So if you have that, I'm on page 85 of the hardbound book. But he says here, the majority of Christians have ever seriously wrestled with the problem of simplicity, conveniently ignoring Jesus' many words on the subject. The reason is simple. I know this is repeating, but I think most of us can benefit from hearing it again. This discipline directly challenges our vested interest in an affluent lifestyle. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Okay, so quickly then, there are freedom from anxiety is characterized, he talks about, by three different attitudes. First was to receive what we have as a gift from God. Then second, he talks about to know that it's God's business, not ours, to care for what we have. It develops an inner detachment from those things, so we no longer have to worry. And then third, he says to have our goods available to others marks the third attitude towards simplicity. All right, and that is more complicated. There's so many aspects of life that are more complicated now, where before we might feel free to share something. Now, even good friends that we have here now, even though we know they've self-quarantined, we're basically shut off from most contact with people. It's just difficult to even get close to them, and so this whole idea of sharing really is taken on a whole new challenge, for us. So, all right, so to get on then, the outward expression of simplicity, we talked about two, and here again I would use the phrase, this is where Foster goes from kind of, right, in the old days we call it, you go from preaching to meddling. In other words, he's going to say, and he does say, that it's not enough. You can sit in your prayer closet, you can kneel at your prayer altar, and say, oh God, I'm so glad I'm living a life of simplicity. But he says, if your outward expression of your life isn't one that's expressing simplicity, then you really need to come to grips with what you said in your prayer closet or at your kneeling altar. And so he says, all right, I'm going to give you some examples. I'm going to and lay down some guidelines so that you just don't deceive yourself, that you're really, excuse me, that you deceive yourself that you're really living a simple life. Okay, so the first two we talked about yesterday, so we're just going to brush over them quickly. Buy things for their usefulness rather than for their status. All right, and then second, reject anything that is producing an addiction in you. And that's really a tough one. You know, and I have to think, well, what would that be for me? It might be books. I mean, I just love to buy books, you know. I just, oh, there's a good book. I think I need that one. And so I really try, you know, to see, well, can I buy it on eBay? You know, buy a used book. You know, can I buy it used off of some other large conglomerate that I'm trying to avoid these days? So, you know, what is the addiction? You know, there's anything can become an addiction, right? When it takes over, you know, our life, then it becomes an addiction. It says, remember that an addiction is by its very nature something that's beyond our control. Resolves of the will alone are useful in defeating a true addiction. That's where we, as people who follow Christ, you know, we would say, you know, Lord, you know, I need your help. And in this situation, I think Foster would say, okay, God's quite willing to give you a hand. What do? I think he would say, you go back to the 4 inner disciplines, which are meditation, prayer, fasting, and study. Yeah, I keep giving fasting the poke because I understand that for many of us, that's just a challenge. But hey, if you know, don't let your aversion to that one. If that's just, there's a lot of reasons why people can't fast, but I can't think of any why we can't meditate, pray, and then also engage with a study of the scriptures, not just a reading of the scriptures, and a training of our mind to help us better look at all aspects of life. All right, so third then, pre-pandemic, because he wrote this book in 1976, I think. Oh man, that sounds like so far away, doesn't it? Develop a habit of giving things away. Now, isn't it interesting that the time we find ourselves in, that we have a lot of clean houses, a lot of clean garages, and right now there's no one to give it away to. And so life is a lot of gray matter sometimes in life, and we're in one of those times. And he talks about a time when one Christmas he said that he wanted to that he wanted. Oh, turn the wrong page. He said that he wanted to instead of either making something or just buying something, he wanted to give away something of his, and so he took a bike that was really, you know, it was his bike, you know, and it was a bike that he treasured, and he gave it away to a friend. And he said that as he was going over to the house, he found himself singing, freely, freely, you have received, freely, freely give. And he said he was so happy when he noticed that his son picked up on that idea of giving away that which he had. He said because his 6-year-old son came home one day and said that his classmate needed a lunch pail and asked me if he could give him his own lunch pail. Hallelujah, he writes. So de-accumulate. Masses of things that are not needed complicate life. How many of us have stuff in a storage area that gets put down there and we think we're going to need it, and then we go through it. Maybe we go through it a year later, and then we look at that, and isn't it still amazing the amount of stuff then that we can look at a year later and go, well, I need that. You haven't needed it for the past year. I remember one year we moved, and from we were moving from one church to another, and there literally were boxes that hadn't been opened. And our shortest appointment was 4 years. Most of our appointments were somewhere between 7 and 10 years. There were boxes that had never been opened in that entire time of living in that home. And so at that point, it's just like, obviously we don't need this, but isn't it tempting? Stuff that we haven't seen, that we haven't used, and we can always think again that, man, I'm going to need this someday. Well, I would suggest maybe if you haven't needed it in a year, or at the most 2, it's time to pass that joy along to somebody else. Deaccumulate. Said most of us could get rid of half of our possessions without any serious sacrifice. Can I get a thumbs up? Can I get an amen for that one? Okay, so the fourth one, we want to get through the fourth and the fifth one then. Fourth, he says, refuse to be propagandized. There's a word I couldn't spell in a spelling bee. By the custodians of modern gadgetry. Timing devices almost never save time, and that's true. We need to really be careful about getting sucked in. I mean, that's when just take a look at the advertising that comes your way, and it's almost impossible to be engaged with anything, whether it's a podcast, or, a radio station, television, satellite, all that stuff. Just pay attention. What is it that they're trying to sell you? What is it that they're trying to have you think, what, I just can't get along without this, or how much better would my life be with this? He says, refuse to be propagandized by the custodians of modern gadgetry. He points out how as America, we are over consumers of the world's resources. He writes this, he said, the United States has less than 6% of the world's population, but consumes about 33% of the world's energy. So let me give you those statistics again one more time. That the United States has less than 6% of the world's population, but consumes 33% of the world's energy. Now, again, I remembered, wait a minute, he wrote this book in the 70s. So which way do you think those statistics have gone? Do you think that we are now consuming more of the world's energy, or less percentage of the world's energy? Ding, 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 ding. All right, so the new statistics in the year of our Lord 2019 probably is that the United States has less than 5% of the world's population, but it consumes, drum roll, 15% of the world's energy. So in some ways we could look at that and say we've made progress. Indeed we have made progress, but your astute analytical minds would say, well, not necessarily so, because what we have seen is an elevation of the billion people who have been raised out of poverty in China. They're now consuming energy at a vastly higher rate than they were back in the mid 70s. And so it's a combination of, well, we have done somewhat better, but we still have an energy industry that's trying to forever get us to use more and more energy, because that's how they make their money. But really the vast amount of that has changed, not because of what we've done, but because of the change in the world of billion people literally just in China have been lifted out of poverty to becoming just simply poor. But there's a big difference, when you're poor and when you have nothing. And so that's what we're seeing there. Okay, fifth then and final, learn to enjoy things without owning them. And of course, hey, that's really great, Hey, can I use your trailer? Hey, can I use your boat? Aren't we all glad to enjoy something without owning them, I guess what I would do is I would turn that around and say, how willing are we to share what we have with others, right? How great it would be. And I kind of did this at one church. We developed a list of things that said, here's what I have, like in my garage, please don't go out and buy one. Please don't go out and rent one, So if you needed a stump grinder, we could look, say, oh, well, hey, Frank's got a stump grinder. I don't need to go to ABC rental. And so, that type of an attitude of sharing is really cool. And with today's technology, there are ways that we can accomplish that, aren't we? So that we could share with one another what we have. And isn't that a bugaboo, though, that little bug is somewhat complicating that. All right, so a few questions for us to ask today. Benefit given to us by his own study guide. There are so many study guides out for this book. It really just shows you the caliber of this book. So when so he talks about the challenges of self, and we talked about some of those yesterday. Do I use rhetoric that is consistent with my true intentions? Do I try to impress people? Those kind of things. So here he talks about today, simplicity prevails against the tyranny of things. Out of fear that others might discover who we are, we create an artificial world of ostentatious, another word I couldn't spell, display. Extravagant, I might get that one, or ornamentation, and pretentious style. We call it, excuse me, I won't cough the rest of the day, because I won't talk that much. We call upon the beautician, the tailor, and the dressmaker to create an impression of perpetual youth. We stretch our faces until we look like the Joker. We buy clothes, cars, and houses beyond our means in a frantic attempt to appear successful. All right, so he gives us some questions, and I'd like to end our day with this part, with these questions. Am I living contentedly within my income? Do I act my age? I don't know about that. That's just a fun question, I think. Do I act my age? What's it mean to act our age? I think what he's referring to is, am I trying to act younger than I am? But I think we would have that's just a great question. Toss that around with somebody sometime. Do I act my age? What's it mean to act my age? And is it wrong? What's the new saying? Well, for us, 65 is the new 50. Used to be 60 was the new 50, but now we're up to 65 is the new something. So do I act my age? Am I a compulsive buyer? Well, keep me away from books. Do I try to impress people with gadgets? And it'd be interesting for us to come up with a list of questions that we think kind of confront the tyranny of things. And this time is really giving people an opportunity to perhaps evaluate the place of things in their lives. Do I buy what I can afford and what my responsibility to the poor suggests? Excellent question. Right. He is drawing us into a discussion around our being stewards of what we have. And so let me repeat it. Do I buy what I can afford and what my responsibility to the poor suggests? Okay. All right, so I appreciate your spending this time with me. I did want to, whoops, I don't have, oh, maybe this is it. Yep, here it is. Got my little music stand right here. When we don't have musicians, I borrow their music stands to come in. Wanted to mention again that tonight I have my little 7 o'clock get together, and if you'd like to come and be a part of that discussion, we will watch a movie, Walter Brueggemann's discussion about food. Now, do you like to eat? What's your history with food? and we'll just have some of that discussion. That's at 7 o'clock on Zoom. If you are on our church electronic newsletter, you will have received the Zoom information for that. If you're not, just reach out to me, either with the church or at my email address, khgoffice@earthlink.net, and I'll give you that Zoom information. That's at 7 o'clock tonight. We're going to watch that movie. Excuse me. Watch that movie, and then have a discussion about it. All right, so I want to close with this prayer today. We've used it before. I think it's worth coming back to again. When this is over, may we never again take for granted the handshake of a stranger, which we may not be shaking hands for sometimes. I mean, even this prayer might need some consideration. Full shelves at the store, conversations with neighbors, a crowded theater, a Friday night out, the taste of communion, a routine checkup, the school rush each morning, coffee with a friend, a stadium roaring, each deep breath, a boring Tuesday, life itself. When this ends, may we find that we have become more like the people we wanted to be, we were called to be, we hoped to be, and may we stay that way, better for each other, because of the worst that we have gone through. Brothers and sisters, thank you for spending this time with me, and we'll continue our journey into simplicity tomorrow. If you're in good weather like we are here in northern Illinois, I hope if you're able to get up, get yourself moving, 3 times 15, get that heart elevated. It's so important to not just become glued to the couch or glued to your lazy boy or whatever that would be. And so again, thank you so much. I appreciate your spending this time with me. God bless you. Love you, and we'll see you tomorrow. All right, bye now.